Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 4, More Winners and Losers, or How Technology Affects the Big Picture. Last class we talked about how technological innovation can help or hurt people, industries, or even societies. Let's talk about what influences there are on technology. The interests of certain groups can influence which technologies are developed and which are not. And we saw this when we talked about the Chinese silk merchants. We talked about the carpenters and the plumbers and the electricians halting the idea of the package kitchen. Um, Large groups like the uh, petroleum industry can affect when um, certain technologies, alternative fuel sources are pursued or not pursued. So a lot of times there is influence on what we're looking for, how we can help or hinder a technology being developed. What we value determines where we spend our money, and the support of the technology. So most people value healthcare. So the government puts a lot of money towards um, research and development of new medicines, new techniques. Drug companies will pursue certain drugs for certain diseases because that's what we value. Um, One of the largest items, single areas on the federal budget is national security, and we don't really think about the fact that that jet costs $1 billion. I mean, we just pay for it. So a lot of times, not only the groups, but what they value will determine where we spend our money on to support technology. There is a thing called the technological fix. Now, we talked about the law of the hammer, where one technology is used to solve all of our technological problems. The technological fix is similar, but know the difference between the two. With the technological fix, it is the idea that any problem we have, no matter whether it's technology related or not, can be fixed with technology. And technology becomes our sort of duct tape that will solve all our problems. There's a lot of problems or difficulties when we try to solve social problems and social issues with technology alone. And he talks about this, and Volti talks about this in his book. He describes the idea of the methadone, where they were trying to get people off of heroin, so they started the methadone program, using methadone instead of heroin to sort of, get rid of the effects of heroin withdrawal. Well, the problem is that people went from being addicted to heroin to being addicted to methadone. So that sort of didn't really work, that use of technology. Why doesn't technology work? Why can't we just say, here's a pill and that'll make you all better? Well, technology deals with a specific problem or goal. If we remember our definition of technology that we're using for this class, it is a system that uses knowledge and organization to produce products and techniques for the attainment of specific goals. Now, the goals may not necessarily be easy, okay, but we know when we get there. So if we say, well, we're going to put a man on the moon, how do we know when we've got there? When that guy steps on the moon. Okay, all the stuff that goes into developing the technology to achieve that goal is not easy, but we have a definitive milestone of when we actually have achieved what we want. Also, technological solutions work better in a closed system. In other words, it's not going to be affected by a whole lot of other stuff. So when I go out to start my car in the morning and it doesn't, right? I don't have to worry about whether the stock market in Europe, crashes. That has no effect on my car starting or not. Okay. Um, With social problems, they're complicated, and it's really difficult to isolate one specific cause or even one specific result. So, for instance, substance abuse. What causes substance abuse? Well, lots of things may cause substance abuse. Poverty, mental health issues, lack of opportunity or education, um, all kinds of things that may prompt a person to abuse drugs and alcohol. Um, and then the other thing becomes, well, when do we know everybody is no longer dependent? Well, a lot of times what happens is an addict will go from one substance or being addicted to one thing to being addicted to another thing. So I may no longer be abusing alcohol, but maybe I've become a hoarder, which is a different type of addiction. Um, and how do we know when everybody's gotten there? At what level is it? Just they're not using it now, or nobody ever goes back to abusing drugs again? So it's very difficult. Crime is another one of those social problems. When do we know when we have no longer have any crime? When there's no more murders, when there's no more robberies. If you drive faster than the speed limit, you're committing a crime. So do you shoot people who drive over the speed limit because it's a crime, and then that solves your crime problem? It's a So there's no really one specific cause or one specific necessarily outcome. And another problem is that social problems are often interrelated. So substance abuse may be caused by poverty and may cause crime. So they're so intertwined and interwoven that there is no easy fix. There is no, I'm going to replace a part, or I'm going to figure out how, you know, what happens if I flick the switch. It's like, okay, if I work on poverty, maybe that will help. Okay, but there's no quick fix with a social problem. This concept, the reasons why technology does not solve our social problems, why the technological fix is an illusion, is extremely important. So please understand why technology will not work to solve social problems. On the other hand, there is this sort of idea that, if the people who know technology should be the people who, run it. And technocracy is basically the ability of engineers and others with technological expertise to govern society by developing policies or rules based on technical or scientific principles. And even though we say, yeah, let the experts figure it out, we often will get ourselves into trouble. And we'll lose that sort of thing that makes us human. So if I'm basing all of my decision on rational ideas, I may sort of ignore other things. Scientific management is a sort of business model based on the idea of technocracy. Planning and organization of work done by management experts, separated from, the experts don't actually do the work, the workers do it, and they do whatever they're told and nothing else. Now, one of the problems with technocracy and scientific management is that we want to make sure that the people who are in charge are competent. I mean, how many of us have worked for bosses who were, idiots, that shouldn't have been in their position? Well, what will happen if that's a person who's governing our lives? Okay, so there's our idea about competence. And the fact that, are we going to develop the profits equitably? And what happens when we start making decisions based on technical issues and not worry about profit and loss? I mean, for those of you who are accounting majors. What happens when technicians make decisions about our lives based solely on rational systems and technology? So here's for instance for you. Say two people want to get married and then eventually start a family. So in order to get married under technocracy, that they have to go have genetic testing done to see if they're compatible. Well, they do genetic testing and they find out that there's like an 80% chance that the two of them will produce a child with a genetic disease, a debilitating genetic disease that will eventually cost a lot of money and heartache and everything else. And the technocrats say, well, because of this, either A, you can't get married, or B, if you do get married, you're not allowed to have children because of this high risk. So now they're dictating, human things. What about if at the technocrats decide that in kindergarten everybody gets a test to see where their talents lie, and then they are sort of pigeonholed into educational tracks based on these tests. So this kid has really good math skills, so he's going to become a physicist. Well, we are going to make him a physicist. This kid has really good hand-eye coordination. We're going to make him a carpenter. This kid really, has trouble, so we're going to have him do nothing but the manual labor, repetitive work, because he really doesn't have analytical skills. And that's how we're going to educate this child. And at age 5 or whatever, we've already, because based on scientific principles, we've already planned out these guys' lives. And you say to yourself, well, who would do that? Maybe I don't want to be a physicist. Maybe I want to be an artist. Okay, but the decision's made already. You say, well, this could never happen. Well, I hate to tell you this, but in the old Soviet Union and in China, we see some of this stuff happening. So we have three scenarios here. One is mandated computer time, and what I'd like you to do is read through each of these, decide whether this is something that people should, the person should do. But when you're doing this, I want you to think about who would be affected, and not just the people who are directly affected, but the people who are indirectly affected. I want you to think about who holds the power and why. And then think about why you would think they would either do this, for instance, close the plant. Why should they close the plant? Or why shouldn't they close the plant? And is there a compromise that they can come up with? I mean, these are exercise in determining, how technology affects people and who wins and who loses, and how do we sort of lessen the blow for the losers, if we can, or if we want to. Okay, next class we're going to move on to sources of technological change, the idea of the great breakthrough, effective demand, scaling up, types of technological advance, and how different economic systems may impact technological product development.